Team-based learning in medical education. So what is team-based learning, or TBL? TBL is a structured form of small group learning that emphasizes three important aspects. Number one, a pre-class self-directed learning exercise. Number two, an in-class team-focused learning opportunity. And number three, the application of knowledge to clinical practice. TBL offers a number of benefits over more traditional methods of instruction. Number one, TBL offers very high active learner engagement. In TBL, students take a very central role in the learning process, and they're very engaged throughout the activity. Number two, in medical education settings, TBL can place basic science content into a very clinical framework. And throughout TBL, students develop problem-solving skills as well as critical thinking skills. They also work in teams and therefore begin to develop teamwork skills. And they also develop communication skills both within their teams and with the class at large. Here at the UASOM, our TBL sessions are carried out in a very rigid, structured format consisting of three phases. Phase one is the individual preparation phase and takes place before students come to class. Students are given assigned learning objectives and some way to meet those objectives and are required to learn the content on their own before they come into class. Then phase 2 and 3 take place in the classroom. Phase 2 is the readiness assurance phase. It consists of 2 quizzes followed by a faculty feedback session. The first quiz, termed the IRAT, or Individual Readiness Assurance Test. Students answer a series of questions over the content they were assigned to learn on their own. And then in step 3, the team readiness assurance test, students do the same quiz again, this time working with their teammates. And then following these 2 quizzes, there's a period of time for faculty to answer questions and provide clarification on any lingering misconceptions. The purpose of phase 2 is just to make sure students learn the content and are ready to move into applying the content, which takes place in phase number 3. Which is termed the application phase. This is the most important and the most exciting aspect of TBL, because here students work through a series of case studies and answer questions with their teammates that are designed to have them apply the information that they've learned on their own to clinical practice. So let's look now at each phase a little more closely. So first up was phase 1, the individual preparation phase, which really consists of 2 things, learning objectives and some way for students to meet those learning objectives. The objectives should be written very specifically and very clearly so students know what they're supposed to learn on their own and what they'll be tested over when they come to class for those 2 quizzes. And then some way for students to meet those learning objectives. There are a number of ways this can be done. It could be through a pre-recorded lecture or vodcast. It could be through a live lecture or a reading from a journal article or a textbook. Now, we like to use vodcasts because students really like to learn through this digital method. But any of these methods can be used to give content can be delivered to students via these methods for them to meet these objectives. All right, phase 2 was that readiness assurance phase. Again, the purpose of this is to make sure students learn the content and are ready to apply it. The first part of this was that IRAT. The IRAT is usually going to be a 10-question multiple choice quiz covering the learning objectives. And we do these typically through clickers. So it's very rapid assessment and very easy grading. And then students will work in their teams to take the same quiz all over again. This is termed the TRAT. Now, with the TRAT, students actually use what are called if-at cards, or scratch cards. It's almost like the lottery. All right, students are given one card with 10 series of lines here, and they literally will scratch off under the letter they think is the correct answer. If their answer is correct, there'll be a star behind that, and they know automatically that they got the right answer. If they scratch it off and there's no star, just a blank space, they know that's the wrong answer, and they can try again for partial credit until they eventually get the right answer. Now, these 2 quizzes are used to generate a grade for the session. So you have an individual quiz grade and you have a team quiz grade. These 2 grades are averaged together, and that will generate a grade students get for this TBL session. So because it's half team and half individual, And because the team is partial credit, it's pretty hard to do poorly on these quizzes as the overall grade. And then following these two quizzes, there's a period of time for faculty to provide clarifications and answer questions. This is called sometimes a mini lecture. The key here is that it's not going to be a lecture. It should be very, very brief and only address major issues that students still have with the content or any lingering misconceptions students may have about the content. Phase 3 is then the application phase. And during this phase, students will work through case studies. All right, there are 4 S's to these application exercise questions. The first one is a significant problem. The questions should be something very relevant to the learners to pique their interest. And for medical students, what's more interesting than a clinical case? Number 2, it should be the same problem. All teams in the room will work on the same case and the same questions, so they will be able to engage one another in discussion along the way. A specific choice. That refers to multiple choice questions. The questions that are posed to students along the way in the case study are multiple choice questions. They're not open-ended questions. And then number 4, simultaneous reporting. During the application phase, a question is posed to students. They will work in their teams to come to a consensus answer, either A, B, C, D, or E. And then at some point in time, the instructor will have every team answer the question at the same time. And they do this by holding up colored cards with their letter on it. This is called simultaneous reporting. So all groups will answer the question at the same time by holding up their letter card indicating their answer. So what are qualities of a very good application exercise? Well, number 1, generally what works really well are unfolding clinical case studies. And what that means is students are given information sequentially along the way. So they might be given the patient presentation and then answer a question. And then they're given, for example, radiology or lab values. Then they answer another question. And then they're given more information and then answer another question. So instead of giving students all information about the patient at one time, it's stretched out, it unfolds over time. Number 2, the application questions should be very difficult questions with more than one defensible answer. Because we want students to really engage in the content and think critically, they need to be able to distinguish between more than one possible answer. If questions are too easy, students will come to their answer very quickly and they won't really think hard about the content. So we want very difficult, very challenging questions with more than one conceivably correct answer. You don't have to have one correct answer for these because these are not graded. And then number 3, the facilitator or faculty member must stay neutral during the discussion and promote good student inter-team discussion of the questions. So after students report their answers by holding up their card, the facilitator will then engage students in a conversation about why they say this is the correct answer or why this other team said this thing over here was the correct answer. So this promotes discussion amongst students between the teams about these various answers to each question that comes along. Okay, so here's an example of an unfolding case study that's used in Fundamentals 1 to teach anatomy of the spine. So, students are given this patient history. Mrs. B, a 33-year-old female, presents to her primary care doctor with complaints of progressively worsening pain in the lower back and posterior leg. She states that the pain began approximately 1 month ago. At the time, was localized to the lumbar back area. Soon thereafter, she began to experience a burning sensation down the posterior aspect of her left thigh and leg, extending down to the foot. Bending over exacerbates the pain, and most recently, she's also begun to experience numbness in some of her toes and foot. Physical exam information. A straight leg raise test is performed, which is positive. We also test the Achilles tendon reflex, and we note moderate hyporeflexia on the left side. So we give students the presentation and some very simple physical exam findings. Then we give them a question. Based on this history and physical exam, which of the following should be done next? An X-ray of the L spine, a CT, an MRI, ultrasound of the L spine, or do we just treat with pain and some inflammatory drugs and observe? So more than one of these answers could be thought of as the correct answer, depending upon who you ask. We want students to really think about which one of these would they do and really weigh the odds between more than one defensible answer. And then students will hold up their cards at some point in time, report their answer, and then we will engage in a discussion about the pros and cons of each one of these and why why team 1 may have chosen A and why team 5 may have chosen C, for example. Then we give them another question. All right, we give them the MRI now. Here's the MRI. So what is your diagnosis? All right, so now we give them some more radiology and ask them to make a diagnosis based on interpreting these radiographs. Then question 3 requires them to use the information that they have from the radiograph and the physical exam findings, and also knowledge of anatomy to pinpoint what nerve may be affected by this herniation. So this is an example of a series of questions revolving around one case study in which information is given to students a little bit along the way as we intersperse information with very difficult, challenging questions. There are a number of resources available to help with becoming proficient at team-based learning. The Team-Based Learning Collaborative has a website which is very informative on a variety of things. There's also a couple of papers. Creating Modules for TBL by John Pally is very good. Also, Teaching Skills for Facilitating TBL by Derek Lane. It's also very good at helping instructors become very good facilitators. And then MedEd Portal is a AAMC repository of instructional activities, and there are a number of TBL modules peer-reviewed and published on MedEd Portal that can also be obtained and utilized. Thank you for your time.